Welcome to EPG Pathshala. I am Amita Bhide from Tata Institute of Social Sciences. This is a module on causes of poverty and exclusion, part of the paper on community organization. Before dealing with poverty and exclusion, we need to systematically understand what are the causes of poverty and exclusion. In this particular module, we will take two approaches to this because the world per se has been significantly devoted a lot of attention to both the problems of poverty and exclusion. There are many theories of poverty and exclusion. So we will review some of the seminal theories on poverty and exclusion, what causes poverty and exclusion. But more importantly, this module we will try to focus on one particular framework which tries to combine multiple theories. This is called the revised empowerment framework, which is also a framework which is very compatible with the overall notions of community practice and which leads us to thinking about how does one deal with poverty and exclusion. So basically one sees that there are multiple theories which have been given for understanding why poverty, why exclusion. There are some explanations which focus on individuals, there are some explanations which focus on systemic inequality, and there are some explanations which focus on why particular groups are excluded from the benefits of development and societal processes. We also see that poverty is usually seen as a static state of deprivation. But in combination with exclusion, poverty becomes a very dynamic concept. And a dynamic concept which changes along with the context and the processes which are generating exclusions. So as they are changing, the nature of poverty, sites of poverty, experience of poverty keep on changing. Just to give an example, historically exclusion was very feudal in nature, linked to the overall experience and linked to being born in particular groups, etc. Contemporary exclusion is linked much more with the structure of global capital. So the forces which are producing exclusion are changing, and so therefore is the nature and the cognition of poverty and so on. So revised empowerment framework is something which brings forth with it the entire understanding of social exclusion, but it also brings with it the understanding of poverty as really unfreedom using the Amartya Sen's capabilities framework. So let's quickly review some of the more seminal theories on poverty and exclusion, taking course to different kinds of theories which will expose us to what these explanations have been. So if we look at Morgan, for example, Morgan looks at how poverty is linked to wider changes in economy. And when we say wider changes in economy, this is actually about how the structure of economy changes from individual, collective, or perhaps collective farming, to thinking about how individual properties evolved under a feudal system, then how that got changed to industrial economies. And in all of these changes, one is basically seeing that the profile of poverty also got changed. At the same time, one is seeing that individual attributes are also critical in terms of understanding why poverty itself. We also see a very interesting theorization which has been given by Carter. And Carter basically looks at multiplicity of assets. Okay? So asset-based frameworks basically talk about different kinds of resources and the control over these resources, access to those resources, and therefore deprivation from those, alienation from those. And this is a very important notion as well, to look at not just individually held propertied resources, but to also look at other assets which are perhaps societal, collective, etc. Taking this forward in the specific context of India and what is relevant to India, one sees the entire theorization which has been given by Jodres. Jodres looks at the role of social inequalities in generating poverty, and he basically observes the entire role of caste in some ways, ki why there is persistence of poverty among particular caste groups. This is also a thematic which has been then taken forward by several other people like Deshpande and so on and so forth. One very interesting theory in this regard is to look at Tilly. Charles Tilly uses the entire concept of enduring inequality, and what he proposes basically is to say that it is the nature of this interaction between unequal groups. Those processes are extremely critical, and according to him, it is in these processes basically that one finds the seeds of how and why inequality has persisted over a period of time. It's perhaps also linked to thinking about Barbara Harris, and Barbara Harris takes us to a slightly different realm, where she asks the question of that what is the glass ceiling of all the different poverty redressal efforts which are being carried out in contemporary society. And then she basically looks at the attributes of the contemporary capitalist system which exists in most parts of the world, to explain why, in spite of substantive poverty redressal efforts, people continue to be poor and there is a significant proportion of poverty. These include things like how war causes poverty, how the entire capitalist system is linked to that. It includes things like the broader trends of informalization and the overall orientation of the system in order to move towards a race to the bottom, which undermines the interests of labor, and so on and so forth. We look at Lewis's theory of culture of poverty, but more importantly, the adaptation and the revision of the entire explanation given by Lewis to then also look at Arjun Appadurai's revision, which talks about the culture of aspiration and how aspirations among the poor are also, it's a task which is a pedagogic task in terms of expanding the entire realm of aspirations itself. We have feminist scholarship today which discusses the overall phenomenon of feminization of poverty, which means that we see recurrence of poverty within women in particular, within the household. So it is not as if the household is poor, but that within the household you basically see the experience of poverty being even more locused on women. And then we start looking at wider processes of exclusion itself. So where Thorat and Newman talk about the neglect of labor, the race to the bottom through the restructuring of production processes, Ashwini Deshpande, who looks at role of caste and social inequalities, Arjan Dehan and Kabir, who look at the experience of exclusion and the experience of specialization of poverty. So this is the entire repertoire we would see of the seminal theories on poverty and exclusion. How do we look at this and all of these theories in order to create a more working understanding of, in specific context, how is poverty produced, how is exclusion produced, and how does one challenge those? What is a framework which will help us to act on that poverty? And from that point of view, we basically use this revised empowerment framework, which has been worked on by Deepa Narayan and Petish. So Deepa Narayan and Petish actually combine a whole lot of theoretical work which we have described so far. And basically they say they are trying to combine at one level structures as well as individual agency. So there are two sets of factors which are in constant interaction with each other. And we try to look at both of these. What are those aspects of opportunity structure which are critical, and then we try to look at what are those aspects of individual agency which are critical, and then we begin to see how they interact with each other in different ways in order to either produce poverty or in order to also enable individuals to get out of those structures and move out of poverty and move out of exclusion. So opportunity structures basically represent different arenas of exclusions, different arenas of struggles which the poor face on an everyday basis. So on one hand you have the institutional climates, and on the other hand you also have structures. What does this mean? Social structures and institutional structures really mean the everyday state agencies. It means and includes the different societal structures like caste networks and religious networks, the overall structure of patriarchy. They also observe that there is a overlap in social structures and institutional structures. Like to give an example of Odisha, you have an overall societal ethos where the people from upper caste and the people from the coast in terms of a region are generally more predominant. Now, when it is these people who are present within the state structures, the various governance frameworks, and these are also people who are present within the villages, one basically begins to see that the way schemes operate, even though developmental interventions are meant for the poorest of the tribals, they are still getting appropriated by the groups which are coastal or which are the higher caste groups. So there is a considerable overlap in between social structures and institutional structures. Then what the implication of this is, if you have much more social structure thing, then it necessitates more cultural action. If you have an institutional structure which is more problematic, then basically this requires action at an institutional level, which is a change in governance, etc. Within this institutional climate itself, there are certain parameters which are very important. One of these is information. So information is important because you need to know new opportunities, new schemes, new ways of or new entitlements, the protocols for that, and how restricted information itself becomes a barrier for the poor. And one needs to understand that institutional ethos. The other part of it is understanding participation, because what participation does is that it molds the developmental programs to the actual needs of excluded groups. Otherwise, they remain structured in such a way that the program exists, but on the other hand, people are not able to benefit from it. This is linked to also the overall experience of adverse inclusion, which has been discussed both by Naila Kabeer as well as Sukhdev Thorat. Other aspects of institutional climate, we need to talk about accountability. And often one will see that institutions are characterized by corruption, nepotism, clientelism. All of these are different things. Corruption, I think all of us understand. Clientelism is a very, very easy way of uh, bending down to populist kind of gestures and or patronizing gestures without doing justice to a rights perspective. So this keeps the overall character of domination around. It does not really address the most basic needs of people, but rather gives importance to tokenistic kind of needs which keep this thing intact. For example, in many slums, you will have politicians who are focusing on only doing those public works which can carry their names, as opposed to thinking about ki, what are those real basic needs that particular slum communities may have. Similarly, one can look at how the structures of accountability are structured. So you will see that government institutions, while they are operating in a local context, they are only accountable to a higher authority rather than the local context in which they are working. So you have a school in a village, but the teachers are only accountable to their authorities who are sitting in district levels or tehsil levels, but not to the community. So they can afford to be absent here because there is no structure of accountability which kind of pulls them down. Uh, the capacity of local organizations. Again, this is very critical. Local level institutions, local level organizations are important because they can actually shift the entire direction of development to local needs, something which is suited to local voice. On the other hand, you may have these local institutions existing, but they may lack very real capacities in terms of financial capacities, human resource capacities, and this can be a barrier to the effective implementation of projects or of programs. One very interesting example over here is in Madhya Pradesh. It was observed that even the ICDS, the Anganwadi workers, in many contexts were unable to even avail services for themselves. So they saw themselves as extremely disempowered, not only within the overall ICDS system, but the overall change making system of the government which existed in the village. So a challenge and a positive change can be how does one make them experience first a positive experience of all these local institutions which exist around them, which include the gram panchayat, the village dispensary, the tehsil level anganwadis, and so on and so forth. And this perhaps can act as one of the links in a chain then which improves the capacity of local organizations. While we have looked at the institutional climate, we now need to also look at social structures and what are the characteristics and possibilities of these social structures. Here, they are largely looking at attributes of these social structures because the specific social structures differ in different countries. For example, caste as a structure exists very particularly in India. It does not exist in other countries. Similarly, while there are many people and authors who have tried to understand caste through the lens of race, the experience of race is something which is very, very critical for nations in Latin America, for nations in like North America, and also the continent of Africa. So rather than adopt a lens which specifically talks about particular structures, what Narayan and Petish have done is basically to look at the attributes or the characteristics of social structures. So one attribute, one possibility is how open are these structures? And by openness, one is basically trying to see कि are they open to people who are traditionally excluded and can they include them in, or have these systems congealed become more rigid, and therefore especially when even singular exclusions, leave alone polyvalent exclusions, become very difficult. For example, we saw the experience of Dalit children in schools. The school as a system, and without looking at it as an institutional system, the schools admit Dalit children. But on the other hand, the entire caste system has congealed so much that it is unable to give a equity based experience for the Dalit children and constantly exposes them to various insults and indignities. The second characteristic that we need to look at of social structures is conflict. The conflict aspect is really based on strategic interests and looking at whether the extent of conflict is sharp, whether there are more collusional possibilities, whether there is much more contestation. A very interesting example in this regard is to look at Thane. Thane in Maharashtra is a region where there is a very sharp inequity, especially in terms of land ownership and then access to other resources between the caste landlords and the tribal groups who are extremely excluded. The number of landlords is few, the number of elite is few, and therefore the conflict here becomes extremely sharp. As opposed to that, if you go to other districts in Maharashtra, one may find that there are no large elites, that there is a number of smaller interest groups or lesser scale kind of conflict. Now in this kind of a possibility, you see that it is much more difficult to bring up and see the conflict, even the structural conflict which exists, through only a conflict lens. One has to necessarily move through a more collaborative kind of a approach. The third aspect within this is competition. And in an ethos where there are multiple groups within which alliances can be built and where there is intense competition, sometimes it may become possible for disadvantaged groups to also find allies and then stake their claims. This often is kind of the case. Look at the case of a city like Mumbai, and where there are multiple contesting groups staking a space, staking a claim for the space in the city, and these kind of alliances which people have been able to find have ensured in some ways that a substantive numbers of the poor have been able to stake their claims. You have 60% of the city which is poor. On the other hand, in a city where the conflicts are very sharp, the poor have been thrown out of the city. So these are possibilities of social structures which operate in local circumstances which we need to note. So at a structural level, you basically have societal structures and you have the institutional ethos, and a constant interface between these really creates what scale of opportunities exists for the poor and the excluded in order to get out. But equally important perhaps is the agency of the poor themselves. The experience of intersecting marginalities tells us that the agency of poor is extremely important to countering poverty, to dealing with poverty. So we need to think about what are the aspects of this agency itself. What is agency? Agency means the ability of poor people and groups to actually take purposeful actions in their own interest. Within all the literature on poverty and exclusion, there is a lot of disagreement about how important is agency. Theories and theorists acknowledge that it is important, but to what extent it is important? Not, I mean, there is not a whole lot of agreement. So there are people who talk about poverty solely as a structural issue. So if you move towards the more left of the theoretical continuum, you will basically see that there is a tendency to see poverty solely as a structural issue. On moving from there, then there are people and theorists who look at poverty solely as a construct or as a production of an individual agency. Both get critiqued, and therefore there are a whole lot of people in between as well. Some of the people in between, one can think of Amartya Sen, who talks about capabilities approach, Ellis, who looks at a livelihood framework, which is again a combination of both a structural approach as well as an individual agency approach. There are people like Rakodi, Carol Rakodi, who talks about capabilities have varied forms, and that it's not just individual agency but also collective agency that matters. And therefore, what Narayan and Petish do is that it divides agency into some aspects which are more individual and into some aspects which are more collective dimension. So what are those individual kind of or family focused aspects? So basically here one is talking about different kinds of capitals and different kinds of abilities, capabilities that households, individuals have. They include material, so you have to have what kind of physical assets, claims, recognition of entitlements, access to productive resources. This is the material dimension in terms of agency. And possession of these kind of material assets definitely enables making of claims. We saw in the case of Mushahars, for example, in Bihar, that a complete lack of access to productive resources, including land or including livestock, is something which is a critical barrier for them to come out of their exclusion. Human capabilities. Obviously and evidently in modern day societies, education, skills, information are important aspects of human capabilities and which have enabled people, and this is something which consistently comes out of studies, that education is extremely critical in terms of both lending strength to voice, but it is also critical for creating more productive and new assets that one can earn in a future life. The third dimension of agency is social. Social fabrics, networks of support, how strong are they, how weak are important aspects of capabilities. They matter very critically for in enabling or disabling a person from opportunities. Some of our studies in the context of Mumbai show that there is a fairly high tendency of maternal mortality in the newly migrated communities from rural areas. This is because some of the new migrant communities lack social capital. They don't have the wherewithal to actually access public goods and systems of health which are available in the urban area. On the other hand, they also lack the social capital by which they can deliver at home in a safe manner, and the combination of both of these makes them much more vulnerable to incidences of maternal or even infant mortality. The political aspects of the agency, that the modern state gives a whole lot of entitlements, but do individuals, do households have the capacity to pursue rights, to make those claims, to access information, to participate in forums and the overall political life of a community? That matters critically. John Harris has made several studies where he sees that the poor are highly participative in an electoral process, because they do recognize that ability to participate in the electoral life is something which enhances their life chances. This is something in many parts of the world may not exist. But this is not just at a systemic level, even at a personal level, individual level, family level. It is important for people to be able to have the wherewithal to pursue and participate in some of these processes, and it can be very, very difficult. Psychological, because it is also recognized now that self-esteem, self-confidence, as Appadurai points out, even the capacity to aspire are all important aspects of the agency of the poor. We now move to the collective aspects of agency. And within the collective aspects of agency, why is collective aspect important? Collective aspect is important because social structures and social relations cannot be only countered through an individual-centric process. They have to be countered and challenged through a social process, minimally a backup by social processes. And therefore, collective aspects of agency are important. So what are those dimensions? One is voice. What is voice? Voice is basically a demand by those who themselves experience poverty, exclusion. They determine a trajectory of change from themselves, and they have to create a vision of change. That kind of voice is important. Similarly, organization, because organization helps to translate voice into a demand. It enables an association of all of those voices, and some of the more structural aspects can actually be countered through organization. We need to think of representation. Representation, because we understand that the state is a very, very important actor within the entire countering and challenge to poverty and social exclusion in many different ways. It is an arbitrator, it is also a provider of public or merit goods, and from that point of view, representation or the ability to represent to the state is an important aspect of collective agency. And finally, I think one important dimension of collective aspect of agency is identity. Paulo Freire talked about poor people are always like, and that like is to be like the oppressor, which means that there is no sense of selfhood. Okay? The selfhood and therefore the level of aspiration is always to be like that experience of the oppressor, and therefore a collective process is necessary for developing that ability to aspire itself, and which needs to be nurtured. Okay? So how does all of this interact? On one hand, you have these opportunity structures which themselves are like an interface between the institutional ethos and the societal structures, and you have aspects of agency which are individual and collective based. Both of these, when they interface with each other, they produce outcomes for development. So this interaction between opportunity structures and capabilities is dynamic. It changes over time, and it can affect incomes, resources, of different people, both positively and negatively. It can enable people to counter some exclusions while they still remain entrapped in others. And it may also be that some of these outcomes may be temporarily transient, or they may also sustain over a longer period of time. So, how do we conclude? We have seen multitude of theories and we have been exposed to one framework which tries to combine a whole lot of elements of these different theories. Through these, we come to accept that basically poverty is multidimensional. That we also see that that just as economic dimensions are important, so are the aspects of socio-cultural theories. And it directs us to say that how poverty is produced and reproduced is not just an interplay of structures, but it is also several aspects of agency as well, and how they dynamically interact with each other. So this is a kind of a working framework, and we look at factors in such a way that if we have to reverse these realities of poverty, of exclusion, then one needs to basically discern both the ways in which poverty and exclusion exists in particular contexts for particular groups, and then begin to both analyze this and counter these factors both structurally as well as at the level of expanding the capacity of individuals and families. For references, please look at a very, very interesting report by Deepa Narayan and Petish, which is called Moving Out of Poverty. Thank you.